So we spent the last few days talking in great depth about the shifting nature of the digital economy, the implications that the digital transformation has on this region and globally. One of the things that we at UNDP have noticed is that a lot of the interactions in this new economy are happening outside the realm that's captured by traditional statistics and under the radars of official institutions. We wanted to explore what is actually happening in the online spaces that make up this new economy. What are the implications of the invisible trends that we have only anecdotal evidence on so far? What are the implications on policy, on welfare, on the changing nature of work? What does this mean for the systems of governance that we have in place? For this reason, we have partnered with the Oxford Internet Institute, and we have produced with them some research into the actual trends in terms of both online labor, but also other economic activity that's happening on the web and that's not typically captured. We find this data quite exciting, and we are actually looking at ways of integrating it into our programming throughout the region. We have looked at trends both for our macro region, that is Europe and Central Asia, and for the Western Balkans. And we would like to share these insights with you today. To do that, with us we have Mr. Fabian Reisemann, I hope I did that right, from Oxford University, and Fabian Stephanie from the Humboldt Institute for Internet and Society. I would like to invite you to please join me. Take the stage, sit, stand, do what you like. Here's a clicker. We hope you find these insights exciting. Enjoy. And we will need a handheld microphone as well on the stage, please.
Thank you. So this is working? Yeah, okay. Hi everyone, thanks for having us here. I'm Fabian Reisemann. I'm a researcher at the Oxford Internet Institute at the University of Oxford. And what we are going to show you is some of the findings with a focus on the region, so Western Balkans, and also in comparison to other Eastern European and Central Asian countries. And first I want to draw your attention to one website here, the iLabor project. This is a project I worked with at the Oxford Internet Institute. It is a multi-year project trying to measure and investigate digital platform economy. So what is a digital platform economy? You know, you have a couple of important platforms you use every day, like Twitter, Facebook, all this kind of stuff, but this is more leisure or free time activity. But on the other hand, you also have kind of things that are more related to economic means. We don't talk about things that are happening in companies, but are more or less entering the market from a new stage. So the most important platform every one of you knows probably is eBay, platform where you can trade commodities, where you can just send parcels and stuff. But in recent years, there have been a development to digitalize more and more economic activities. And among them, there are online labor platforms. In our opinion, it is kind of the most direct manifestation of the digitalization of labor and services. And therefore, Professor Lidon Virta started the iLabor project, and it tries to investigate, as you say here, how labor markets work that are not anymore bound to a specific place, but that can be traded directly online. So you can have a look at this stuff. There's the online labor index that tries to measure over time, very much like normal labor market statistics, how the online labor market is developing. So now you might ask, okay, what the hell is he talking about? Here's an example of it. Upwork is one of the largest online labor markets, so basically the eBay for service trade. And how does it look like? How does it work? It works in a way that people can advertise jobs. So this is just a screenshot. You see a couple of different tasks here involved, and there's a fixed price for this task, and it has to do with some specific skills. Here at the bottom you might not be able to see this because Fabian is sitting in front of it. A couple of skills are required here. Neural networks, TensorFlow, machine learning, PyText. So these are all kind of specific programming languages or topics that relate to specific programming languages. So you immediately see it's not only about kind of more simple kind of things, but also high-level knowledge-intensive work. But you can also earn something like $500, and on average, for example, this employer here has paid an average of $82 per hour. So it is really serious money that you can earn on these platforms. So therefore, it might be very interesting, particularly for countries that don't belong to kind of high-income OECD countries to get access or kind of to bring many people onto these platforms, because there they can get jobs that they couldn't get otherwise because they just don't live in the US or they just don't live in New York, so they cannot just get a programmer job over there. So it might be worthwhile, particularly for countries of the region, to look into this. And we have investigated this on a global scale, and this is what I want to show you here right now. So on this world map here, you see cities colored, red or blue. Red are those cities that have bought more projects than they have sold on the platform, and blue are cities where more people have sold labor than bought. So basically net buyer, net seller. And the lines between the cities all relate to transactions. And what you see immediately is that there are large intercontinental, international flows of labor going from one place to the other. And you see that, unfortunately, still many parts of the world are basically white spots. So this is true for most of Africa, most parts of Latin America, and of course also less populated regions in Central Asia. But you see a couple of hotspots. For example, here, if I may show you this, you see that a lot is going on in northern India, around New Delhi and Pakistan, Bangladesh, Philippines, and also, interestingly, in Eastern European countries. So the countries of the region that we look at. And most of this labor is flowing towards the US or to the UK and other European countries. And in the other direction, money is flowing to these online freelancers who can find jobs online. And this is what we want to understand better. What are basically the pre-requirements for these work to happen? Why is it happening at one place and not in another place? And what can we do about it? What should maybe policymakers, governments do to increase their online workforce? Here are two links. You can open interactive dashboards. Unfortunately, we are bound to static presentations here, but we have created two interactive dashboards that give more of a better impression of the picture. We have done two dashboards, one for this conference, Western Balkans HTML, OILab.org is basically a website of the Oxford Internet Institute. Fabian, this is me, and he's also Fabian, so you can easily remember this. Two dashboards, the first about the region here for this conference, and the other one, as Irena said, this is a comparison between countries from Eastern Europe and Central Asia. And here are a few results that I just want to show you. This is another network representation just focused on the Western Balkans region, and you see a couple of economies here. You have Albania, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Montenegro, North Macedonia, and Serbia, and you see the size of the circle, of basically the kind of the size of the cake each country has, is how many online workers did they have in the sample we have taken here. This is 2013 data that we kind of had a complete 6 months of transactions, and then you can, on the dashboard, you could do this on your phone if you like, or on your computer when you're at home, you can click on each of these arrows, and then you see how many transactions went from one region to the other. So in this case, for example, from Serbia to North America, 1,600 projects were traded. So 1,600 people in Serbia worked for North American employers on this platform in this time. And the other way around, as you would have expected, not too many Serbian employers have used this platform to hire people from the US. But on the other hand, you could imagine, okay, a lot of income is flowing to these regions, and there's also more details provided in the dashboard about this. And you see already within our relatively small region here quite some differences between the different economies. So you see Serbia, the largest, okay, also most populous economy, but you have other places as well. North Macedonia doing relatively well, while, for example, Albania is at the moment still a relatively minor participant in online labor markets. And not only this on a country level, but you could also look into the within-country distribution. So what we see here is again these 5 economies, and this is the income that went to them, income in US dollars per 1,000 people. So it is kind of very much like a per capita GDP equivalent. And we have highlighted the capital region within each country, and you see that still online labor platforms are not very much distributed across the places, but rather concentrated. So you see basically the higher the dot is, the more income this region or city got from online labor. And here, for example, highlighted, again, you can click on all this stuff on the dashboard. Highlighted is, for example, Belgrade, and they did quite well. They did best in Serbia, and by several orders of magnitude, they got more online labor income than other regions within Serbia, and very similar patterns emerge in the other economies here. And one interesting case, for example, is Albania, where you see the capital region, Tirana, is doing relatively well on the same level like many other places in the region, but the other regions of the country are more or less absent. So we see still loads of room for improvement to bring online labor also to more rural areas and to smaller cities. And I think that it was, from my side, if I'm not mistaken, one other thing that I wanted to show you, this whole online labor market is not only kind of a static thing, you can just work on it, but again, you can have developments, you have different jobs, you have these kind of more intense deep learning or machine learning tasks, you have simpler things like data entry, and one of the most commonly used technologies there is web development stuff, so basically the development of websites. And here you see, for example, over time, how demand and price have shifted over time. And you see this very much like a stock market or so. So if there's more demand, prices go up. If there's less demand, prices go down. So there are important dynamics. There are different technologies. So for online workers, it is not only a chance to just have some job and earn some money, but they can also over time kind of strategically maybe move from one technology to the other. Maybe start with web development, then go on, if their skills improve, work on things that bring a higher price. And this, it was from my side, and Fabian continues.
Thanks a lot. So, thank you first of all, UNDP and the organizers of this venue. It's a pleasure to be here and to stand on the stage now for the second time. Thanks Irina for the introduction, and thanks Fabian for the introduction on online labor, because you can't really, the picture wouldn't be complete to talk about labor if you don't talk about skills, as Fabian already mentioned. And we also had a look at skills. So one other platform that we examined, which is quite crucial when it comes to digital skills and how skills can be acquired online, is Stack Overflow, which is globally the largest question and answer platform for programmers, software developers, data scientists. So millions of people on this platform, they ask questions, they get answers from their peers, and as Fabian made the example with this job advertisement on Upwork, we saw that one of the technologies, one of the skills that were required on this platform was TensorFlow, which is a software environment, broadly speaking, where you can train very sophisticated algorithms. And here, for example, one user has a problem, obviously, with starting TensorFlow. So pip is the console, you know, the console command where you start the program and it's not really working. So he or she addresses a question to the peers and actually pretty immediately afterwards gets answers, and the problems are solved. So this is not only very helpful for the community, for people who actually want to increase their knowledge and solve problems, but it happens to be also on a meta level for researchers like us, a very interesting database for looking at how these skills, how these contributions, how did they develop over time, how are they distributed geographically, and this is what we investigated in and what we're also trying to depict on the, let's say, second half of the dashboard that that Fabian had already advertised. So here's one example. These postings on this platform, so Stack Overflow not only has a question and answer forum, but Stack Overflow also has a forum where companies can actually advertise their jobs. So I'm a web developing company in Belgrade, for example. I'm looking for a web developer. I post a job advertisement there, and the easy thing is I'm talking to the community directly of people who are knowledgeable in this field, and I can mark my advertisement with certain tags, with certain technology tags, for example. So, for example, I want something to be written in JavaScript, And so I put the tag JavaScript on this job. And this is very handy for us as researchers because it allows us to differentiate, so to tell apart differences in the development between different technologies, between different skills, between different programming languages, for example. And here we made the example of Android, so a specific, cell phone specific environment, mobile specific environment, or for example Python, a very general programming language, or for example, I'll probably turn to that side, you can see SQL, so an environment that you need to make requests on databases. And the interesting thing is, if you compare the demand of these skills on this job board of Stack Overflow with the posts that you see, so to say in economic terms, the supply side of these skills, you see, for example, that SQL, a language that had been there for a couple of decades now, actually since the 60s and the 70s, you don't really see on the supply side in terms of posts, there's not a lot going on over time because it's pretty saturated. You know, there are not really new, difficult, challenging problems coming up that need to be solved in this question and answer forum. But on the other hand, you see on the demand side, the demand for skills in SQL is still increasing, and that is pretty intuitive because companies are still using SQL a lot. You know, a lot of companies deal with databases, with database requests, while on the other hand, for example, Android, which is compared to SQL, a fairly recent environment, fairly recent technology, here you see that it did increase, let's say from 2016 to 17, but then it kind of saturated on a certain level because not every company deals with Android, with mobile phone environments, for example. So this is a nice contrast between the differences in the supply of these technologies and the demand of these technologies that we can observe on Stack Overflow, on those digital knowledge economy platforms. Similarly, for the occasion of this summit, we wanted to have a closer look at this region, and we examined the job board of Stack Overflow and looked at companies that have a hub in Belgrade, but also in other cities, and connected these cities. So they're basically all connected to Belgrade because the companies presented in Belgrade also had another location in another city, and connected them and colored them by the different technologies that these companies required on their job advertisement. And there are a lot of interesting things to see. I invite you to play around with this interactively also on the dashboard. One thing you could, for example, see is that you see there's a big hub down there, which is London, actually, down here in the corner. And you see it's really big because there are a lot of companies in London that also have a hub in Belgrade, and they also share kind of a similar typology of jobs they require, which is in this case Python. So jobs where you have to be knowledgeable in the general programming language Python if you want to be an applicant. This can also be done on a much larger scale, on a global scale, with 2016 data here, where we connected certain technologies, certain tags that we find on those advertisements, and the connection between two tags is made if they appear commonly in one advertisement. So if, for example, an advertisement asks for applicants that are knowledgeable in C++ and in Java, a connection between the two tags is made. And if you scale this up and do this with a lot of advertisements, thousands of them, you actually get this very impressive big network where you can see that certain tags, certain technology tags are larger than others, and they're larger because more links are made to them from other technologies. So you could, for example, say they are more central, they're of more central importance in this network. So a lot of other, let's say, sub-technologies or sub-skills, they build up on these major skills that you see as central nodes in this network. And that might potentially be something interesting for you if you think about earning money on online labor market platforms that Fabian had mentioned, and you think about, okay, what might be the language, the most useful language, or the most generally applicable language in this network of skills or technologies that I should learn in the future. And lastly, we would like to conclude with this slide, which goes again back on a macro picture and compares different regions. We're looking at Russia, Ukraine, the United Kingdom, and the Western Balkans here. And again, looking at four technology or skill tags that are similar, so they come from the similar domain. We're looking at machine learning, so teaching algorithms to make predictions about unknown data, for example. Skitlearn is a specific package within the field of machine learning, and deep learning is the term for very sophisticated machine learning, very sophisticated algorithms. And lastly, our favorite technology that we've been using throughout our presentations is TensorFlow, is this specific software environment. And one clear pattern that you can see over here, if you look at the different regions, how they developed over time in terms of posts, in terms of activities on this platform, you see that there's a certain time lead and time lag. So, for example, looking at deep learning, we see that in the United Kingdom, activity started to increase already in 2012, and then being followed by Ukraine and Russia, and then about 2.5 years later, activity also starts to rise in the Western Balkans. And this is an interesting macro-level trend that we see, and this is also an interesting starting point for us as researchers, for new research, thinking if this is a general pattern, if this is generally applicable maybe to the diffusion of technologies. That's something we're wondering about and that we want to investigate in the future, if we see general patterns of the diffusion of such technologies over time. Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot. Thanks. I'm sure there are many questions. This is, again, I'd like to ask you if you could go back to the slide with the links so that people can, with the links, so that if anybody wants to take a look at the platform while we discuss, they can go ahead and do that. There is more information available on the dashboard, particularly the one that includes Eastern Europe and Central Asia, because you can also look at elements such as online knowledge creation or online knowledge access. So there is some more there. But please, let's take a few questions or comments or additions, points for discussions. Yes, Tanya, please. You can introduce yourself and take the microphone, please. Just a second. We have another microphone here.
It's over there.
Or okay.
It's a very interesting project and very impressive dashboards that you have created. And I'm interested in which programming languages you use to make them.
Yeah, thank you very much. And you pointed to a very important thing. Most research projects of researchers have a personal component too. And as far as I can tell, both Fabian and me, we studied economics, and in economics you're not so much into programming. And if so, then there's either Starter or what's the name of the other thing, the click and drop thing, I forgot even the name of it. Some other easy stuff, which doesn't bring the... Yeah, and in any case, we found at some point Starter won't do it anymore. So I started to learn R, and I can tell Fabian started Python at some point, and then I also had to migrate to Python, because if you look into this stuff in more detail that we couldn't show here in detail, so if someone asks me, I have, let's say, a couple of months' time and I want to learn one language, one of these data analytics languages, then I would recommend Python, though I'm still a fan of R. But Python is just more applicable, and you will find many more jobs posted by companies as well as online labor jobs if this was what we were looking for in learning Python.
And one more question, in terms of the code, have you put it on GitHub? Would it be possible to access?
This is maybe a bit embarrassing again, as we are both economists by training and just learned this all on our own. We just shared it on Google Drive, and it's not yet in the kind of the raw code and data is not yet in a format that I would be happy to share, but this is actually a good project for us to improve our skills and to become more central in the network of languages.
So is there any way of getting in touch with you and be able to communicate about your work?
Yeah, you can just get in touch with us and we'll link you up. That's no problem.
Thanks.
No problem, absolutely.
Thank you.
No.
Anyone else? Well, perhaps we can make a link. I'm looking, of course, at Branka and Jelena with some of the research that was done locally and how it fits. I mean, we discussed this on the International Day on Wednesday, but I think we have a different group here.
Yeah, I think that we kind of lost momentum. And we had discussion with Fabian about our research and the Oxford Internet research. But let me ask a question that let's deal with some employment and labor questions, and I don't have any at the moment. But what would you say, Fabian? Actually, I don't have a question.
You don't have a question, but maybe other people would like to learn a little bit about what you are doing as well.
Yeah, what we did, we actually explored the digital labor from Serbia by also using or scraping some platforms that Internet Labor Institute did. But our perspective was actually to explore decent work dimensions and socioeconomic position of digital labor in Serbia. Why we did it? We did it because we found your results on the web. We also learned about World Bank research in 2015 that pointed out to high number of digital labor from Serbia. I'm talking about crowd work guys, and that was the motivation for us to just do similar research in this context. So the data that we present are kind of just focusing on the decent work dimensions, which include decent pay, access to social protection, access to retirement plans, and so on and so forth.
Okay, great. A question in the front, yeah? And then over there.
Hi, that was a very great discussion that I recently found out about this, not through your research, that there is a lot of outsourcing jobs from the Western Balkans especially. But I want to know what's your intake on it. What do you think why this happens a lot in the Western Balkans especially? And I know you're analysts, but you want to base your answers on data. But just your thinking behind it.
Yeah, maybe if I can go for this one too. So the research on which these dashboards are built to, which are, as I have to say, are more descriptive in nature and not so much going into inferential statistics. My interpretation of the kind of global picture is it is really down to human capital or skill distribution. Because, you know, simple one-on-one economics would tell you the higher the wage differential, so basically the lower the wages in the country, the more people you would expect to use these services. Because if, let's say, the job brings you 10 US dollars per hour, that might not be that much in the US, but in certain places it's actually a lot. But we still see that it is a recent phenomenon. So it is not that we have at any point in time millions of jobs. Over time we have seen kind of millions of projects. But if you compare it kind of to normal large labor markets, it is still a relatively tiny phenomenon. So there is loads of competition going on between the freelancers for jobs, and we see for some relatively simple things like, for example, data entry, so things that you just need MS Excel for and not skills at all, more or less. We see that on average more than 100 people apply per job, so the employer can basically choose. And one very important thing that we see is very much like with kind of our day-to-day daily activity when we buy something on Amazon, for example, or on a different online job, we are also more or less tempted to go for those products that have most reviews or have best reviews. So reputation plays a big role. So if people were able to get their first job, then they are much more likely to get a second job and a third job and so on and so forth. And we see just that the combination of relatively low wages in comparison to kind of high income places like London or San Francisco or New York, relatively low wages plus very broad distribution of good human capital and education just gives the Eastern European countries a comparative advantage, and also India and the Philippines, because India and the Philippines have been kind of classical outsourcing companies, also kind of the pre-internet area of the kind of 1980s, 1990s. So services like call centers or back offices have went to these English-speaking countries too. So this is, in my opinion, one of the explanations why, in particular, lower-wage countries like most of the African economies are not doing that well, because they, unfortunately, to a large extent lack the skills that are necessary or marketable. And this is actually also the reason for the part of research that Fabian just presented, to find out, not just on a kind of very general level, okay, learn programming, okay, yeah, fine, we all know this, but what should I learn given that I have just limited time to learn things? Yeah.
Over there, and then Katarina.
So potentially this question is unfair because I snooped around the other dashboards, and there was one that included different countries in the Western Balkans and Eastern Europe as a whole, and it focused on online knowledge access. And you only use data from Wikipedia, I guess because it's readily available, but it's also, Wikipedia is more for fact-checking and less for knowledge access. So were you trying to use data, or could you get data from Udemy, Coursera, Duolingo, or are you considering looking at how these online learning platforms are shaped regionally and who's learning what?
Yeah, I can go. I'm happy to go for that. So you're right. In this case, we did not look at any of those platforms that, for example, offer massive open online courses. One thing is, as you might imagine, for technical reasons, because you know it's a completely different technical environment once you have to log in into this. I do agree with you that they do have a lot of potential as data sources as well, if you want to measure how skills, how knowledge is acquired in different regions around the world. But I would say in this case you would need to have or you should, I think the best way would be to establish collaborations with these platforms, actually, because I think, as I said earlier, I think for both parties this would be beneficial, both for researchers and also for the standing of those platforms. Why we went for Wikipedia for conceptual reason as well is because it's a very general a data source. I mean, if you think of massive open online courses, they are still heavily clustered in certain regions of the world, while I would say it's not an exaggerated statement to say that probably everybody from almost all regions around the world has accessed or accesses or uses Wikipedia on a, I would even say almost daily basis. So this was this is the conceptual reason why we went for this.
Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah.
Sorry? Thanks. Thank you. So my name is Berkin from UNDP Istanbul Regional Hub. So I think the critical question is to find the equilibrium between the online livelihoods and the strength of regulation, you know, provided by the government. And in Branka's piece of research, it was so, not really interesting, but it's so obvious to see how regulation still lags behind in terms of registration for social protection coverage and so on of those who are making use of these online livelihoods. Did you come across to a system or a mechanism or a website, or maybe it can be even a startup in collaboration with the government authorities, that helps quicken the registration, to help social protection coverage of those, the online workers? Thanks.
Thank you for this question. I think to answer briefly, most of these online labor platforms, online labor websites are based in the US and Silicon Valley. One I think is in Israel and another one in the United Kingdom, and it is still a very young and small company. So it is also just for them, you know, they have to care about the business, maybe IPO, maybe acquisition, these kind of stuff. I think it's just for them also not completely obvious what the impact could be, as they also focus on their home country, you know, or the political situation there. And I think kind of one important step here is to establish, as you just said, establish kind of mechanisms, establish relatively secured pathways that we can say, okay, for example, do we see that if demand increases, price increase? These are very simple things. They have to make clear before we can come up with any regulation. There are some people, for example, that demand a minimum wage for these online labor platforms. I myself think this is far too early to say anything like this, because if, for example, as we just talked about reputation, if reputation plays such a crucial role, and if we then impose a minimum wage, it could just lead to the situation where all those people who already have certain reputation just for free get rid of the competition, who can at the moment undercut the wages. So I think, in my opinion, it is too early to impose kind of classical labor market regulation on these platforms. And as you just indicated, it might be better to raise the attention and maybe partner with these companies, as this is a good thing. These platforms basically could be outrolled and could go into other countries. They don't have more costs involved if they have more users registered. And one important thing, maybe one simple thing that could be done, is just try to increase demand for these services. Because it is still that at any given moment in time, we have many more freelancers registered than we have demand at this moment. So it will not be the case that you can just now on your phone register and will find a job super easy. So you will need to invest time to find your first job, and this might be considerable problem.
Thanks. Can I ask you, sort of, so, okay, you outlined some of the differences now. What other things to keep in mind in terms of the distinction of the trends that we're seeing in the online labor market as opposed to the trends in sort of traditional offline labor markets? Conceptually, how do we think about these differently? You mentioned some points now in terms of regulation and in terms of supply and demand. There's a bigger difference, but if there's anything else that we should keep in mind.
I mean, if I may jump in and think it through a bit more from the skills side, actually, I think a big difference is that actually I mean, again, speaking from a personal perspective here, I think it's pretty fair to say for both of us that the skills that I mean, they ask about our skills, basically how we built this dashboard, the skills we acquired almost solemnly via the internet. So there was, and I think that's a big difference if we compare it to the acquiring of skills in a traditional labor market setting, and that is also addressing going back to the last question. It's also actually a big chance, because people do not need to go necessarily to a physical school to acquire skills with which they can potentially, there are examples, actually earn a decent amount of money. Yeah.
So the upfront investment there's a huge difference there.
One thing that I might want to add on the kind of one big difference, of course, of these freelance online work that we see here and classical work that we as kind of course, again, with maybe also a bit of a Western or industrial angle on these views. You know, it is not that these workers have an 8-hour working day, 9 to 5. They have to actively look for jobs, which can bring freedom for those people who can find jobs relatively easily. But for those who struggle to get a job because they are maybe one of the 100 applicants for a simple data entry job that gives you just $3 per hour, then this might be more difficult. So it increases flexibility, but at the same time also brings more insecurity. So this is definitely a big difference, though the question is again from which point you look at it. If you don't have a job at the moment, and you can find one if you just invest the time online, then that's still better than non-job at all. But
yes, the mobility aspect is also a significant one. Okay, any last questions from the audience? Comments? Yes, please.
Hello, thank you very much. I think this was a very interesting presentation. My question would be actually more what do you do with this information from UNDP side? How does this help you in your programming of new projects, or basically what do you do with this information?
Well, this is very fresh, actually. We've just started. We have just concluded this segment of the work, and we will be doing more. We are looking both from a regional angle and also nationally in Serbia at shaping a new kind of partnership with different partners, both in government and outside of government, and looking at the future of the digital economy of the region, and looking at different trends, not just labor, but also looking at different ways to shape industry and policy dialogue and so on. So this is something that we are going to be feeding into our work with, I guess, many of you that are present here, and looking at how do we take these countries and these how do we actually take the entire region into the age of the fourth industrial revolution, and what are the elements that are already playing out, and where actually the region is quite dynamic and vibrant, and what does this mean for the economies. We also want to look at the policy angles. So, as I said in the beginning, actually most of these trends are completely invisible to policymakers, because they don't make it to the national statistics, they don't make it to the official data channels. So we want to start working with policymakers on figuring out if there are ways that we can track these trends and track them quicker and get more detailed and more real-time data that will then help us to rethink the way that for example labor policy is envisaged, or what other things what other implications does it have for countries. So this is in early stages for our thinking, but we are going to be doing quite a bit of programming on a regional level around this. We're hoping to actually have a digital development hub here in Belgrade for the entire region that will address these issues along with many others. Thank you for that question. That's amazing. Okay. Would you like to have any final remarks, or we are right? I think just in time. So that's perfect. If you will join me then in a round of applause for our panelists. Thanks a lot. We'll keep doing this work.